morning, everyone. Stand here, I'm quite short. Thank you very much for the invitation of the organizer and also of the Scientific Advisory Board. It's a really honor to speak here today, and I'm really happy. I come from Northern Germany, so I'm really happy all the time to be here. Yeah, today I'd like to talk to you about marine litter. It's an issue that we see. It's not like greenhouse gases that we sort of like cannot tangle or we cannot really perceive. So we know that we call our planet the blue planet, and it's supposedly really colorful. But if you look closer, it's not full of fish, it's full of waste. And we know that only from land-based sources, between 4 to almost 13 million metric tons of plastic are entering our ocean each year. And the German Environment Agency calculated that it would be the equivalent of trucks completely filled with plastic, driving around the Earth in 1 year. So it's a huge amount. We cannot even understand how much it is, I guess. I would like to frame my presentation on 4 hypotheses. First, marine litter is a very complex and chronic issue with many associated uncertainties and knowledge gaps. This is different to point sources, accidental sources, where you can really regulate and target one specific source, for example. It's a really sub-threshold issue. Shipping as a sea-based source of marine litter can globally be considered only as playing a minor role of marine debris. So the main part comes from land-based sources. I would like to send it out now. So addressing shipping is only one part of the really big puzzle that we have to work on the next few decades, actually. Then solving the marine litter issue can create dependencies of awareness, of really an active role of stakeholders that are outside of the marine environmental law perspective. I really enjoyed Professor Tchirkov's overview, where he said, it's a bit of like puzzle. We need to really work with everyone involved. And a lot of other fora have not the same perspective or not the same interest to address plastic, because it's maybe very convenient for them to use plastic. So keep that in mind. And I also like to argue, I'm happy that my former boss of the German Environment Agency is not here. I say that the amount of focus that's right now on marine debris has the potential to actually paralyze the effectiveness of the regime. And I will talk about that in the course of my presentation. So for the purpose now, I would like to use a very kind of old school UNEP definition of what we understand of marine debris. It's any persistent, manufactured or processed solid material discarded, disposed of, or abandoned in the marine and coastal environment. There are different versions of it, but I would just use it as it is now for this understanding. So it has to be something solid. And 80% of marine debris that we find is plastic, so this is the major focus as well. Setting the scene, I know this ratio, we usually say that 80% of marine debris comes from land-based sources, 20% from sea-based sources. There are some fights in the scientific community, but I would just leave it as it is. Here in the North Sea, in the sort of area around Hamburg, we know that this ratio is actually the opposite. So 20% comes from land-based and 80% come from fishing and shipping. And this is proven by monitoring activities. We know that right now we have 311 million metric tons plastic that's produced each year. It was from 2015. And there are a lot of leakages in this system. So the plastic that we find in the ocean are associated with our consumption and production patterns. And we know that by 2050, at least this amount will be 3.5 as much. So that's why we need to now address this issue not in a really piecemeal, sub-threshold way. We need to have systematic changes when we want to make a difference to this problem. Yeah, dealing with litter is on vogue. Every time I say, I work with marine litter, I literally can see the eyes rolling in their heads. Not one of those again. And I understand it. Marine litter is one of the few substances in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development that's explicitly mentioned. There could be chemicals, whatever, but no, it's marine debris. And in the recently concluded United Nations Environmental Assembly in Kenya, 22 of the resolutions that are dealing with substance, with content, 10 of them dealt with plastic in the environment. I think, to be honest, I like this topic, but it's a lot. And who can even read all of them? I mean, it's quite a lot. So just coming back to focus a bit my presentation now, there are 3 major sources of marine debris when we look at sea-based sources. One is shipping, so operational waste, cargo. Then the second one is fisheries, ghost nets that are lost, discarded, abandoned in the environment, aquaculture, dolly ropes, so really those things that protect the nets, they lose some fibers. And the third one is dumping. Even though the dumping regime is quite advanced in with regard to plastics, there are several pathways. For example, the sewage that we bring out into the sea contains microfibers from our washing and personal hygiene activities. So this is a pathway that is important, but I will not address today. And what do we know? Yes, okay, so a lot of people know, of course, this cute little seal entangled in nets. Over 1 million seabirds die at least in the EU each year. This is what is estimation. You know, it's very difficult to estimate that. We know that marine debris has huge socioeconomic impacts. You see the boat, it has impacts on tourism, on ecosystems. The marine debris can really smother seabeds. The coral reefs in Australia are affected. And then we come to my favorite topic, ingestion. And you see here 2 whales, and they've been stranded not far away from Hamburg last year, 2016. And one of them had 13 meters of fishing nets in his belly. Then he had a piece of a Ford, may I say that? A car piece, the entire front of a car. He ingested it, buckets, and at least 25 kilo of other different type of marine debris. So right at the doorstep of Germany, it's at the beach in Germany. And then the right picture on your right top, this beautiful neon colors. This is where it gets exciting because this is the potential human dimension of marine debris. The little neon colors that you see are little microplastics that are found in the mussels of a blue mussel. I hope no one ate a blue mussel in the last couple of days. So this is actually done from the North Sea. This mussel has just like a sponge, sampled or digested the water and has therefore taken up microplastics. This is a dimension that needs more, and it's currently really heavily researched, but it might be a human dimension, this topic, and there are yet a lot of uncertainties whether and how far this is impacting us right now. So there are some, I would like to just outline some knowledge gaps because any, again, environmental lawyer has to look at the scientific side. We cannot just do law by law. We need to understand what are the scientific community, what are they struggling with. First off, we know that dumping might be a source. There might be even more than the microfibers. The paints used on ships and the cleaning of ships, ship recycling could be a source, but I mean, it's not even considered as marine debris, but of course it can be part of marine debris. And the offshore community industry, meaning oil platform, these kind of things, there are no information whether they are a source of marine debris from seabed source. Then also the fate of marine litter. How long does it stay in the ocean? Approximately a little bottle that it's 450 years that stays in the ocean. And I would argue that we need to know the fate of marine litter because then we can move from a risk-based approach to understanding which items we need to target first because they stay the longest in the ocean. We do not know quantities, how much litter enters the ocean. We have some modeling from land-based, but sea-based, no, I don't know. Maybe Anna Boboremai knows more about that. But as far as I know, there is not really some really confirmed knowledge about that. And of course, the impacts. This will be long-term. If we know that one little bottle stays with us for 450 years, we have to somehow arrange humankind with the plastic that we have in the sea. Then moving on to the legal regime, the starting point is the 2030 agenda says we would like to prevent and reduce marine debris, but reduce by how much? If we do not even know how much pollution load we have in there. 1990, 2000, 2010, where should be our baseline? What would we like to achieve? Where should we start? And then overcoming fragmentation, I think is a theme that we had so far. It's inherent in the UNCLOS that we have a very sort of separate approach to the different sources of pollution, and this is why it's quite hindering to have effective solutions for this problem. And then, of course, managing the diverse set of stakeholders that we need to have: waste management, tourism, fisheries, chemical people, just normal people. So it's quite, complex. And enforcement, which we also learned as well. How do you figure out that a ship crew threw bags of plastic overboard if there are several thousand on the way? And I love when people say, "Oh, marine debris is an emerging regime." I like that because it's not. I'm not a graphic designer, so please excuse me. With Professor Schierkop and Ringboom, you have more beautiful timelines, but this is just an outline of when we first have an understanding what the issue, that the marine debris is an issue. So in the 1960s, the United States government already outlined that it could be a problem. Then in the 70s, the London Convention that deals with dumping, and also plastic was part of that, has started already outlining that this is an issue. Then we have the CBD, there's also some work on plastic, Rio Declaration, the MARPOL Convention that deals with garbage. In this case, I will talk about that later as well, was adopted in the 1980s. And it explicitly deals with garbage. So there must have been an awareness that this issue is an issue. And it's just mind-boggling why it's taken us such a long time, and we still haven't moved further in our effectiveness or in the protection regime. So we know there's awareness, we know it has impacts, and my question is, why has nothing changed? And I would like to outline now the legal framework, and I say that with regard to shipping, a lot of things have already changed. So the fundamental approach, if we look at waste from shipping, is the Annex 5 of the MARPOL Convention. And it's an optional annex, so it means that states have to ratify it outside of the normal annexes associated with MARPOL. And it's a very successful annex. 153 countries have ratified it. It has 99.38% of the world gross tonnage are bound by this, so it's quite a successful annex actually. So it means there's a lot of willingness at least to comply. And in 2011, this annex was revised, so it's quite a new starting point for shipping. And I would just quickly outline the 5 pillars on which MARPOL Annex 5 is based, and what this is essentially the pillars of the protection regime that we're looking at with marine debris. The first and most important one is the discharge standard. Overall, the new revised MARPOL Annex 5 has a general discharge prohibition, which is great. And it also includes a definition on plastics, on garbage overall, and on fishing gear, which is quite exciting. So there's no excuse anymore to say, oh, I didn't know. Is this plastic or is this garbage? I didn't know that, so that's quite great. Then there are discharge standards outside and inside special areas. So again, like in the other MARPOL annexes, there are special areas that are noteworthy of protection. There you have a higher discharge standards, and also you need to have adequate port reception facilities in place. So then the ships have an obligation, but also the port have an obligation to receive the garbage. And then there is the port reception facilities I will talk about later a bit more. Then the operational requirements, so the crew on board, they need to make a dedicated garbage storage place. They have operational board. They need to have an information what can be thrown out and so forth. And then the 5th pillar is port state control. We learned it yesterday. That's about enforcement. And there are provisions as well how MARPOL Annex 5 can be enforced. And just coming now to a bit more specific issues. I would say it's very positive that the new MARPOL Annex 5 has now a definition of garbage, including plastic and fishing gear. And what I love is that fishing gear is included now in MARPOL Annex 5. So that's quite an unusual thing if you know that fishing is regulated by the FAO usually. So I think it's quite an ingenious hack to somehow create an obligation to report the lost fishing gear to the flag state and in the coastal state, where if you lost it in a coastal state. However, can anyone guess how much fishing gear loss has been reported so far? No, unfortunately not one. So yeah. So let me put it this way: it's not very successful in that way. So things have to change, maybe. Then something very negative, I would say, is that there is no legally binding obligation to deliver the waste in the port. It's part of the MEPC guideline, but it's not legally binding. It doesn't say it sort of from the outset. And this is something where I would say, I would have argued differently. Now, coming to the adequacy of port reception facilities, like I said, it's a very important element of the MARPOL Annex 5. It says that adequate means that the facilities can receive all the waste of the vessels that usually call on these ports. And the second thing is without undue delay. And this is where it comes back from the Professor Schierkopf's outline with regard to just in time. The crews do not want to waste time to wait for maybe a truck to receive their waste. It's a really important aspect. And I would argue that the definition and the guidelines that have been developed at IMO are too vague, and they are actually really a weakness in the regime. And the second one is that I see it yin and yang. Professor Schirkow said it as well, port and ships. And so far, MAPA Annex 5 has been always quite focused on the obligation for ships. However, they have to have garbage management plans and so forth, but the same doesn't apply to ports. So there has been some stories from crew members where they had separated the waste in the ship, but then they went to the port and they just had to throw it into one big container. So this is really undermining also the efforts that are done on board. And there are some MAPA guidelines that further substantiate it, but they really do not give a lot of concrete guidance. And luckily, the MAPA Annex 5 are minimum standards, and we can, the obligations can be further substantiated. And I have opted now not to choose the EU. I mean, the EU will be front runner, and Anna Bobo-Remain will talk about that later. But I've opted to talk about the really great regime that is established by the Helsinki Convention. And the Helsinki Convention is the convention that governs the Baltic Sea. So from the eastern part, Kiel is, for example, a city that's bordering the Baltic Sea. This is a special area under MAPA Annex 5, so it means it's already understood that this area needs more protection. And the Helsinki Convention, the contracting states have a really pioneering role in addressing ship-based waste. They have done it through a coordinated approach. There's a mandatory delivery of waste in ports. It's legally binding. And they have also developed strategies on port reception facilities, how to organize it with costs. And they have also, most prominently, developed the no special fee system. And Mrs. Reiling talked about it yesterday. It's the flat fee, the indirect fee, meaning that you can deliver your waste free of charge and it's included in the harbor fee. There are, of course, associated aspects to this. So first of all, it's an economic incentive, and the idea is to harmonize it in the Baltic Sea and in the North Sea as well. And some ports do that already in the North Sea and in the Baltic Sea. It's quite a successful element. And there are some further definitions. For example, if there's green ship criteria, could be in theory applied. So you could have a green ship that comes in the port and they have maybe waste management, but there is no certificate, there is no standard yet, so it's really difficult what we understand, or what the port administration should understand as a green ship. And of course, the role of the polluter pays principle and the cost recovery in this aspect is quite difficult, because the ship is a polluter in that they produce waste, they bring it to the port, and they can get rid of it for free in a way, because they don't have to pay directly for it. So these are there needs to be some more work to be done on how to substantiate that. And I think that in the EU there's a lot of work being undertaken with the adoption, hopefully, of next week of the new PRF directive. And now we come to enforcement. So we just had the incentive approach from the Helsinki Convention, and now we had the enforcement. And before I joined the WMU, I worked for the German Environment Agency, and we organized the OSPA-HELCOM workshop on sanction and fines of infringements with MAPA Annex 5. So we had port state control officers, waterways police, port, ship owners there, and we all discussed these kind of things. And overall, the challenges were that it's very difficult to detect plastics. How do you detect it with oil? You can at least sort of have an aerial overview, you can see it. But however, with plastic, you cannot do it. It's sub-threshold. A bag of plastic maybe doesn't kill someone or a bird, but in the cumulative effect, it's really heavy. Then the port state control officers or the waterway police here in Hamburg, they said, we go on the vessel and we have to do ILO standards, SOLAR standards. We are inundated with the pressure. We go on there, and even though we would like to look at it, plastic is the least concerns if we know that these people on board are not safe, because there are some really big issues on board, and we need to have more training on this. And then also there is a lot of different communications between port inspectors and port authorities. So this is a rule of research that has to be more undertaken. And then there's something I would like to talk about as well. It's been mentioned quite a lot of times in the different work on marine debris, is that why don't we just have really heavy fines for those people that are infringed with MAPA Annex 5 obligations? And I'm sorry, I just took the German Hydrographic Agency's information. It's not that Germany is the only country that has these numbers, but it's just really readily available. So in 2015, the 580 deficiencies with regard to MAPA Annex 5 were found, and the total sum of 18,248 euros were fined. And I did a little calculation, it's 31 euros per fine. So I'm not so sure whether this is actually a deterrent thing or not. Like I said, it's not only Germany, other countries do not even disclose this information. So I don't want to discredit my home country, but I just wanted to outline that maybe something has to be done in this regard. And this leads maybe to a research question whether administrative fees would be more interesting in moving forward with this. Then the Paris MOU, this is what Ms. Reiling already talked about yesterday as well. They had 469 deficiencies. Out of them 12 were detainable deficiencies, so they were considered as heavily enough to detain a ship. So that's quite interesting, actually. And because I like to do these kind of things, I look at the Paris MOU is caught in the net. It's not a very strict thing. It's port state control inspectors can write a little comical, it's really funny sometimes, a piece of ships. They really made a good impression on them because their deficiencies and their mistakes were so high. So this is a ship, Fetisal, from Congo, flying the flag of Congo, and that was detained in Greece in 2016. And don't go down the rabbit hole reading down Caught in the Net. It's actually quite funny. So when I read it, I found that, for example, here it's just one. They had a MAPOL infringement or deficiency that they said that the placards were missing from the storage site, so no one really knew where to put the garbage. Because there was no picture, I went to a different example, and I found this. So imagine this is on your deck, and there's wind, storm, water, whatever, then of course these things fly overboard. So this is one example of what could be a deficiency, for example. I'm not so sure if that could be a reason for to detain a ship, but this is something that's an example just to clarify what something like an infringement could look like. And then I just discussed that we have so many different aspects with regard to sources of marine debris, and the regional seas agreements in the Baltic Sea and in the North Sea Atlantic, the OSPAR Convention, the Helsinki Convention, are front runners in this. They have adopted the regional action plans on marine debris that are based, all of them, on 4 pillars: land-based action, sea-based action, cleanup efforts, and awareness raising. And they have all addressed the issue of sea-based sources. They have harmonized PRF systems, so what I said, they really try to push forward that now. They look at enforcement, best practice at fishing industry, and fines for littering at sea. So this is something that they are pushing as well in their own little means, but it's of course only the marine environmental protection community. And to make it a bit more complicated, we have the G7 and G20 action plans on marine debris that were developed both by Germany and that were modeled after the Helsinki and OSPAR Regional Sea Action Plan. So we have here, this one is from 2015, the G7 German Action Plan on marine debris, and then we have the G20 Action Plan on marine debris. So yet another action plan and yet another more information. And then to make it worse, the Italian presidency picked up on this, and the Japanese presidency picked up on this, and I know that the G20 presidency in Japan will pick up on marine debris again. So we'll have yet another layer of information of actions that are coming our way. But there are good news. The International Maritime Organization has adopted in October last year an action plan on marine debris. And I will not go into detail, it's based on 8 pillars. But what I would like to outline is that, in essence, it really picks up on those things that were deficient in the system, really trying to work the different gaps that are known. And I would like to now talk quickly about the regulatory framework, because there are some lawyers in the room, I heard, and then also the effectiveness of PRF. And for example, I mean, the wording is respectfully quite weak, but there are now efforts underway to work further on how to strengthen the role of ports in separation of waste, and then also how to enhance enforcement of MAPA Annex 5, and then also the cost framework associated with port reception facilities. So really working on the lines of how do we subsidize, how do you compensate the waste that can be landed for free in the harbor. And then the last one that I'd like to mention is there will be work coming up that will develop a regulatory framework matrix for the purpose of a gap analysis. If you ask me, there is already enough understanding what the gaps are, but I think it's a good first step also for the legal research community to move forward and to give some substantiation also, for example, from administrative law. These kind of different aspects have to be involved. Just a short outlook. The World Economic Forum has outlined that by 2050 we'll have the same amount of plastic than fish in the oceans, so that if we continue with our business as usual, so it means we need to start doing something. And there are 5 main areas where I think things will move forward. It's first of all marine debris in the new agreement addressing biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. In the IGC that just ended this week, there were at least 12 states that mentioned explicitly marine debris. They talked about pollution, but they meant marine debris. So it's already high on the agenda there. Then we know that marine pollution is a reverse strategy of the commons. We do not take something out, we throw a lot of things in. And what this does to our commons, we'll have to see about that. Then addressing the issue with plastics, Germany and other countries are pushing hard towards the International Convention on Plastics that would address the entire global value chain of plastics. And it has not been very successful, I would say, but I guess shipping has to be part of this one. This will be coming ahead as well. And the role of the IMO and the green shipping concept, or the sort of move towards zero emission with regard to garbage, this is something where IMO will have to work a lot as well. And then, of course, the regulatory framework relating to cleanup efforts, liability and compensation of damages relating to marine debris will be as well part of the work. Just to conclude, shipping has quite a relatively high protection standards with regard to marine litter, but there's further substantiated needed, and we know that enforcement must be strengthened, but I would argue that the role of incentives and really trying to make a business case out of it, giving waste a value, this is the way forward. And there's a lot of research to be done, both from the legal community, but also from a lot of other fields. And the responsibility of states to address the global value chain will be probably the way forward when we want to talk about it. Thank you very much.